Hello, welcome to Proletariat's Gone Wild. Just kidding. Today we're going to talk about Woodstock 69, 94, and 99 in conversations that don't help with making friends or trivia. So I was just thinking about Woodstock, and I was like, what was Woodstock? Who was Woodstock? Or why was Woodstock? And looked into it and found a pretty interesting story that I'll go into in a really very basic overview. So first of all, I guess, how did Woodstock begin? Where did it come from? So Woodstock came from these two guys, Joel Rosenman and John P. Roberts. So they were like university friends. They went to grad school together to do business. They liked to golf. They had the same sense of humor, similar age and background. And after law school, they decided they wanted to write a TV show. So they came up with this idea, kind of like Seinfeld MASH sitcom, but with about two rich kids that just had a bunch of money and didn't know how to spend it. So every episode would be like they would get into a new sort of scheme. And they took out an ad in the newspaper that said, like, wealthy young men with unlimited capital looking for new investment opportunities, where they were essentially trying to like steal or borrow ideas from people that had sent in with proposals for their TV show. And they were going to bankroll this because Roberts was the heir to the Polident fortune. So they had a lot of money to go around. It wasn't like they couldn't just do anything they wanted to, but they could do a lot of stuff that they wanted to. So they got about 5,000 ideas for this show, and they were all kind of really bad, but there were a couple ideas that really caught their eye, Rosenman and Roberts. So one was converting a church in Manhattan into a recording studio to sort of capture the Aquarian sound of the time, which was like very like Beatles, Bob Dylan, like The Doors, like just they wanted to get that sort of make a bunch of those records in New York, and the business proposal was really good. So they scrapped the idea of doing a TV show, just went and made this music studio as one venture, and decided to pursue a career in venture capitalism, the two of them. So after the music studio was created, they got in touch with this guy named Michael Lang and his friend Artie Kornfeld, and they had run a music festival in the year before in Miami. Had about 25,000 people. He had run a head shop. He was really into Mr. Lang, and he was like a promoter. That was what he did. He was very good at it, and he had sent a business proposal to Rosenman and Roberts, and about doing a music venue like the one that they'd had in Manhattan, but doing it in the woods. And very quickly, like as they started negotiating, they realized that their talents and like what they could accomplish would be much better instead of making an outdoor music recording studio, that they would just have a festival, hence where Woodstock came from. So what they did is they charged like $13 to $15 or $18. You would just buy a ticket out of the mail. It was advertised as an event that would be upstate New York or downstate New York, anyway, rural New York, that it was going to be in, and people could just buy a ticket and go. Their original target was like around 50,000 people, and they figured that they would just be able to make a bunch of money. They could get investment capital to build all the sound stages, blah, 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 blah. First roadblock was that nobody in New York really wanted them to be in their town. So the original site that they had planned actually passed a bylaw saying that you couldn't play music beyond 10 meters of the property line. And there was a lot of people protesting because this was also, during the Vietnam War and at the end of the Civil Rights Movement. So America was like a very violent place, and there was a huge gap between, the hippies and the non-hippies. But there brings up one of the bigger misconceptions about Woodstock, was that it was like an anti-Vietnam, or it was a very political movement, when the owners or the promoters of the event all went to great effort not to involve any politics in the concert whatsoever. It was always billed as 3 days of like peace and relaxation, that no one was supposed to come there with political agendas, and everyone was just supposed to be kind. It was all about love, 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 love. Anyways, this one town doesn't want to have them, so they get contacted by a man named Max Yasgur, and he was like in his late 40s. He was almost 50 at the time. He was one of the biggest dairy farmers in all of New York, and he offered his site at Bethel, about 100 miles outside, I think south of Manhattan, and they used his space. It's not a very happy ending for Mr. Yazir because he died a couple of years later. The people in the town, they hated him for having the concert there. So he ended up selling his property, moving to Florida, and died of cancer a couple of years later. But he said that he didn't regret offering them the property. So the event went ahead. Unfortunately, on the very first day of the event, the day before the first day of the event, 50,000 people had shown up, like, without tickets. There was no money, like, nothing was really ready. And upwards of 1 million people had clogged all of the roadways going into the town. So now you already have a logistic nightmare that would just keep getting worse and worse and worse as the days went on, to the point that they had to rent helicopters to fly people in and out. All of the food ran out, so there were, like, free kitchens were showing up. And it was very hot, but then it would also rain at sometimes. Acts were getting late. It just became a logistic nightmare very, very quickly. So they maybe expected to have 50,000 people there on the first day. And, like, high estimates would say about 500,000 people were there, in the height of it. They had always intended to charge people for the concert, but because they just completely underestimated the amount of people that would show up, within the first day, they completely abandoned the prospect of charging people money. So overall, the concert cost about like $3.2 million. Adjusted for inflation would be about $15 million today. And they only made like $1.5 million back from it, which would be like a $5 to $8 million loss that they made from just allowing it to be a free festival. But that was done to keep riots from happening. And we'll see what happened with that a little bit later. So in 4 days, there were said to be 8 miscarriages, 2 deaths, and a bunch of other stuff that happened that was not very good. But compared to what would happen at later Woodstocks, that wasn't anything. There were 0 cases, even though there was about 1,000 cases a day of injuries. Those were all like foot injuries, or very few, or like very simply fixed overdoses kind of thing. So, but there was not one incidence of interpersonal violence during the whole thing. People helped clean up after it was gone, but there was a huge impact on the environment. There's a lot of negatives associated with the first Woodstock, but overall it was a huge success as in terms of making a movement of peace and love and spreading awareness of the music, and it became an iconic moment, probably one of the most important moments in music in history. Woodstock 1994 was much different than the first one. So it had taken them already 11 years to recover the losses from the concert, because they had to like sell movies and books and t-shirts and documentaries and get investment from people for future projects, which was what would happen in 1994. So there's a very big gap in official Woodstocks because it was just such a gong show. So the big difference in the 1994 concert was that they wanted to be very on top of charging people out the door. They weren't losing money. They were also going to restrict the amount of food or supplies that you could bring in from outside of the concert, again, to jack up the concession sales. But just like before, they completely underestimated the amount of people that were there. They were very quickly overrun at the doors, and even though the rules were in place, it was really easy for people to smuggle stuff through. The other big difference was that the sound of music was a lot different. So the first Woodstock was all about it was like Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, CCR, groups like that have a very like one of those sort of vibes. And now we're looking at like Korn and Nine Inch Nails and like Jackal and some musicians that, it's death metal, it's angry, it's a little angry music, right? So then you have like the mosh pits are happening, you have people that are getting really drunk. It's also called Mudfest because it just rained the whole time, so people are like jumping into mud. And overall it was a wild, angry sort of concert, but not such a gong show as you would see in 1999. So in 1999, Woodstock was held again. All 3 Woodstocks were held at different venues. The third one, biggest problem, was that it was held on an airfield, like a refurbished airfield. So you have 500,000 people in the space of like 1,000 acres of hot asphalt, and the temperatures were about like 35 to 40 degrees Celsius. So you have that. So one guy died of dehydration. That one, the water was like the big thing about that was the cost of water and like the rates of dehydration that were happening among people in the crowd. So water was being charged between $4 to $6 a bottle, which by 1999 standards was very expensive. They weren't allowed to bring your own outside water inside. Beer sales at the concert were actually cheaper than getting water sometimes, which also led to people just getting very rowdy. The public water stations were really, really badly managed, which caused some people to smash them open so that the pipes would then blast water everywhere, which then turned what little grass was there into complete mud and all of the porta potties to overflow. So then you had 500,000 gallons of human piss, 200,000 gallons of human shit that just mixed in with the ground, and people are moshing in it and throwing in it. At that point, Kid Rock, who's a piece of whatever, he was encouraging people to throw water bottles at each other. So like when you look at the footage of Woodstock 99 now, which is all freely available on YouTube, people are just like throwing stuff at each other. People were throwing mud and feces and water bottles and just like screaming and moshing. At this point, sexual assaults started happening in broad daylight. There were reported gang rapes. There was open vandalism. Everybody had their stuff stolen. Half the security quit within the first day, and it was just not good. And this event all culminated with fires being set. Like on the last night that they were there, people just started having open bonfires, and just ripping everything down. They blew up a Mercedes. It was just basically wild as people, there was a mass exodus and people just burned the whole thing down. It was really bad. Yeah. And that's why we can't have nice things. There hasn't been a Woodstock since. There was supposed to be one in 2019. That one was canceled a couple months before when all of the sponsors pulled out because they're like, no, thank you. So that's the story of Woodstock. Crazy, crazy, crazy. If you like this and you'd like to hear more, then please like, comment, and subscribe. P.S. # Stop Asian Hate. Thank you. Bye.